Hello, and welcome back to our podcast, everyone.
Hey.
Today's episode was sparked by something really simple, but also so important to pay attention to, and that's ordinary encounters. And you had some that stood out recently, Nina, unexpected meetings that really made you pause.
I did, yes.
And what struck us both was how these everyday moments can turn into something much more if we allow them to. If we stay open, curious, and willing to connect, because sometimes the most meaningful conversations sneak up on us right in the middle of daily life. And it's also a reminder of how important it is to meet people with kindness. A smile, a kind word, a small compliment, those things really matter. They ripple out in ways we often don't see, and sometimes they change someone's whole day.
That's exactly it. You never really know what someone is carrying with them. Rich or poor, happy or sad, extrovert or introvert, young or old. We all walk around with stories, with losses, with memories and feelings that aren't visible on the outside. Thank God for that, actually. Imagine if we could see it all. That would be a bit exhausting for all of us. But we often tend to stay quiet, to keep the hard stuff mostly private. We don't walk around telling everyone we meet about our struggles, of course not. But when you dare to be a little vulnerable, when you drop the mask for just a moment, you'd be surprised at how people can respond. Suddenly they may open up too. And what starts out as a casual chat can turn into something really meaningful.
That's the thing. These encounters usually come out of nowhere, really, and you might be standing in line at the store, talking with a colleague at work, or even sitting next to a stranger on a bus. And suddenly grief and real life shows up, quietly, out of nowhere. It's almost invisible to the rest of the world, but to the two people in that moment, it could feel huge. And it also reminds us of how differently we all carry our pain. Some of us need that talk, and some throw themselves into work. Some hold everything together until they finally feel safe enough to let go. And there's no one way through grief and hard stuff. It looks different for everyone.
And the truth is, you cannot bypass it. You can try numbing yourself, distracting yourself, forcing life to just move on. But I think grief has this way of catching up with you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually it shows up. That's my experience, anyways. And I believe that this is why these small human moments can matter so much. They're kind of a small reminders in our everyday, reminders that compassion, both for strangers and for ourselves, isn't just nice, it's necessary.
Yeah, it really is.
Because what life has taught me is that when you're willing to share a piece of your own story, you might be giving someone else the courage to share theirs. And in that shared space, there is something deeply healing, I think. And just as important, as you said, don't hold back from telling people when they've made a difference. If someone's been kind to you or helped you or just showed up in a way that mattered, say it. Give the compliment, say thank you. It doesn't have to be big or fancy, but those little words can actually stick with people, especially when life feels heavy.
That's so true. These moments might look tiny from the outside, but they're not tiny at all. They can be little cracks of light in the middle of everyday life. And they remind us that we're not actually as alone as we sometimes think. And they call us to stay humble. Because every single person we meet is carrying something that we cannot see.
So today we want to talk about the stories we carry and how they sometimes show up in the most ordinary moments.
I think we've all had those moments where a completely ordinary conversation suddenly shifts. Like out of nowhere, you find yourself connecting with someone, sometimes even a total stranger, on a much deeper level. And often it happens just because you or they dare to be a little open.
Yeah, exactly. It never stops amaze me how a tiny bit of openness can create these beautiful moments, even in the most ordinary places.
And you actually had something like that happen quite recently, right? A moment that really stayed with you.
I did, yes. And as we said, this is why this episode came about.
Yes. Tell us what happened.
So, some weeks ago, I was helping my son look at a car. He is buying his first, well, not his first car, but his first newer one. And you know me, I'm no car expert, though I love cars. So I was really just there for moral support, you know? So, okay, before this, to make a long story short, he'd been in touch with the dealership about a specific car, but they hadn't replied for quite a while. I think a week or so. He sent them emails, tried calling a couple of times, and no answer. And I must admit, when he told me, I was a bit annoyed. But he, out of the blue, just said, well, maybe something happened in their family. You never know. Let's wait and see. And that really struck me because most people, and me included, would have just thought bad customer service or, something like that. But his first instinct was compassion. Sweet child of mine, I must say. And sure enough, when the dealership finally called back about a week or so after, they apologized and said they had a loss in the family. So, he was right.
Wow. I mean, first of all, that is so sad and understandable that it took them a while. And also kind of incredible how he could sense that, because it's maybe the last thing you expect when you're just trying to buy a car, right?
Yeah, but unexpected things happen to all of us for sure. But I was honestly amazed by how calm my son stayed through it all, and proud mama moment. So anyway, the next day we went over to the dealership, and the man who met us was really kind and very professional, and he apologized again. And he mentioned that the funeral had been just the day before. And then he said something like, but now we're back in business. So there we were, walking around this car. Honestly, the perfect car. My son was asking all the smart, practical questions, and I was mostly nodding along and making comments about the color. Beautiful champagne color, I have to say. And we did the test drive, and afterward we sat down in his office, and that's when he said something like, it usually is the dad who come in with their kids. And without even thinking, I just said, well, to be honest, his dad, my husband, died a few years ago, so that's why it's me here with him. And I didn't have to share that, of course, but maybe because he had already opened the door a little, it just felt natural in the moment, so it slipped out.
And that's it, right there. One small moment, and suddenly you're not talking about cars anymore. You're in a whole different kind of conversation.
Because right after, he, of course, apologized about what had happened to us and asked a bit about it. And then he kind of paused and looked at us. And then he said, I actually lost my little daughter a week and a half ago. She drowned and we buried her yesterday. And I still get chills saying that.
Oh no, that is, yeah, what do you say?
So there we were, sitting in a car dealership, talking about cars, colors, and finances, and then suddenly grief, real, raw grief.
It's horrible. I mean, poor man losing a child, that must be the absolute worst thing in the world.
Yeah, totally the worst. And he told us a little about what had happened, about that week after, about the funeral. And then he said he came straight back to work that day because he didn't know what else to do. I just needed to do something normal, he said. And honestly, what do you even say in a situation like that? I mean, there are no right words. I just wanted to hug him, I think, all of us were fighting to hold back the tears at that moment. So it felt right just to sit there with him in silence and listen. It's one of those moments where time almost stands still.
Just hurts my heart, because how do you respond to something like that? There's no script for that. And also, I guess in a way, I can totally understand that instinct to keep functioning, to go back to normal, because if you stop, you risk falling apart completely. Yeah, just heartbreaking.
Yeah, it really is heartbreaking. And his story really stayed with me. It reminded me how little we know about the people we meet every day. And it made me reflect further. I mean, everyone we meet in life has their story, stories that shape them in different ways, and everyone has their own way of coping. Some need to talk, some withdraw, some lean on others, and some, like him, throw themselves straight back into work. And some dare to be open if the people they meet allow them to, in a way. And he did that. He dared to be open, to share his story to complete strangers, because the door for that opened in a way in that moment. And it also shows there is no right way, there's only your way. We all cope differently.
That's so true. Some dare and some don't, even if the door opens and the moment is there. And none of it is wrong. That is important to acknowledge also. Grief isn't linear or not something that you can measure or compare. It's unique to every person. It's personal, and yet in these unexpected moments, there's this strange kind of connection. For a little while, you're not strangers anymore. You're just human beings carrying loss.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Grief is all around us, really, just quietly sitting there in the middle of our everyday life.
And often it comes out sideways, if I can say that, like in that moment. A small comment, and suddenly a door opens. And if you're willing to step through, you really see each other. And that can be really beautiful and helpful, maybe.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it was. Unexpected, but honest and real.
Sometimes when our grief bumps into somebody else's, we recognize ourselves in them. Maybe we even see each other a little more clearly.
Mm. And then we can, in a way, let the guard down a little, because we know that they understand, like really understand on a deeper level. And I'll probably never see that man again, but I'll remember him. I'll remember how open and brave he was in the middle of such fresh, raw pain. And I'll remember how that moment made me pause and breathe a little deeper, and also appreciate life more and be more humble to these everyday meetings. And I hugged my son a little harder and longer that day.
Understand that. And that is so true, and actually also quite beautiful when you say it like that, because these meetings, it's like a sacred pause, isn't it? Life goes on, but for a second, everything stops, and you're reminded of what really matters.
Hmm. And maybe that's what this episode is, just a small invitation, an eye opener to be gentle with people and with yourself. Be humble, be open, also for new connections, new people. Be including, look people in their eyes always, because chances are someone near you is carrying something heavy, even if you can't see it.
Exactly. And if you happen to find yourself anywhere and someone opens up, try not to rush past it. Maybe just stay there for a moment, look them in the eyes, and listen.
Because at the end of the day, we're all human and we all carry stories.
You know, your story about that man in the car shop, the reflections we had over this very topic reminds me of something I've often thought about, especially when it comes to parents who have lost a child or can't have children. because one of the most complicated and painful moments can be when someone casually asks you, how many children do you have? Because that's kind of a common thing to ask, I think, you know? And I actually did that once. We were at an event with my husband's work. And, when you meet people for the first time, we met a couple, and my husband obviously knew them from before, but we started talking, and then I asked the wife, how many kids do you have? And she just responded like, oh, we actually don't have kids. We have 2 dogs, 2 French bulldogs. And then we started talking about that, of course, because we have so many Frenchies in our family. But a few months later, I saw she posted on Facebook how they couldn't have kids, that they struggled, and that it was sometimes painful when people asked. I don't think she necessarily was directing that to me. I just think it's because it's such a common question to be asked. And how painful it can be when you get that question. And that made me think, so now I don't actually ask that question anymore. I just wait maybe till people ask me.
An important reminder for sure. But it is kind of a common thing to ask, as you say. But I've heard that from so many grieving parents. And it's never a simple question for them. If they say the number of living children, they might feel like they're leaving someone out, almost betraying the child they lost. But if they say the full number, including the child who's died, it can lead to this awkward silence, unwanted pity, or just people not knowing what to say.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's rarely asked in a deep or intentional way. It's usually just small talk. It could be at a school function, at a work party, like me, at a random coffee meetup maybe, and suddenly you're faced with this impossible decision about how much of your story to reveal to someone. You might never see them ever again.
And yet sometimes when people do share, it can open this door, like the car shop man, or in other cases someone else might say, I've been there too, and suddenly you're not alone in the moment.
And that can be really game changing because, as we know, grief can be so isolating. And meeting someone who truly understands, it's like there's still this immediate connection between you.
It truly can be, yeah. But it's also important to say it's okay not to share. Some people are more private, some protect their story like it's the last fragile piece of themselves, and that is not wrong. You also have to be able to read the room in a way. It isn't always the right time and place, and it's your choice. I mean, it must feel right for you.
Yeah, for sure. Not sharing is not wrong at all. And maybe that's also a big takeaway, that we can't assume to know how someone will want to navigate those moments. And that's also important to acknowledge. Some need to talk, some need to stay quiet, some need to be held, some need to keep moving like before, like that grieving dad who went back to work right after his daughter's funeral. And none of that is wrong.
So true. We are all so different, and there is no right or wrong here. But I really believe that openness and sharing can be healing in so many ways, and sometimes it's easier also with strangers.
That's true. Maybe it can feel safer with complete strangers if the moment feels right and they open up first.
I just remembered another example a friend shared. She had been at this party, a setting where she didn't really know many people. You know how it is, just making small talk with whoever you happen to sit next to. So she ended up chatting with this woman, and they were having a casual, easy conversation around the table. And then another woman joined them, very outgoing, curious, asking all these questions. And then came the classic one. So, how many kids do you have? And my friend said 3. 2 living and 1 she had lost. And later she told me I usually only say 2 just to avoid the awkwardness, the follow-up questions, or the pity. But that night, for some reason, she chose to be honest. And the woman who asked was, of course, kind and understanding. She said how sorry she was, and the conversation moved on. Nothing dramatic happened right then. But later in the evening, that first woman who my friend had been chatting with earlier came back, and quietly she said, I also lost a child. I have one less too. And then she started sharing her story, a story she had never spoken out loud before.
Wow. So her honesty basically gave that woman permission or an opening to finally share something she'd been keeping locked away for years.
Yeah, that's how I see it. Her openness became the key that unlocked someone else's silence, you could say. Years after the fact, that woman had been carrying her loss quietly, and then because of one small moment of honesty from a stranger, she didn't have to carry it alone anymore.
And that's such a powerful example of why openness matters and also how much courage it takes. Like you said, it's never without risk, but when it works, when it actually connects, it can change everything.
It really can. And I think for all of us, whether we're grieving or not, the key is creating space for those choices. Being gentle, not pushing if someone isn't ready, and then when the door opens, just being there, willing to stay in that moment with them.
Because you never really know when grief will tap you on the shoulder in the middle of something totally ordinary.
You definitely don't.
You know, what strikes me is how grief can suddenly make the world feel both smaller and bigger at the same time. Smaller because in that moment, your friend and this woman, you, your son, and this man weren't strangers all of a sudden. You were just people who had lost someone. But bigger because it reminds you of how much pain and love is quietly out there in the world, hidden in plain sight.
Yeah. And it really shows also why honesty, compassion, and humbleness really matters. And again, you don't need to have the right words. Most of the time, there are no right words, as we all hopefully know by now. But just being honest and present, showing a bit of humanity, it makes a difference.
And maybe that's the thing. Like, grief isn't just something private. It touches the way we meet each other everywhere in all kinds of ordinary situations. It's almost like carrying a second language inside of us. And when you meet someone who speaks it too, you suddenly understand each other on a whole other level.
This whole conversation makes me think of how grief shows up in other everyday places too. Not just with strangers, but with people we already know. You know, friends, neighbors, colleagues. I mean, sometimes the most unexpected people can end up being the ones you talk to the most about it, simply because they're the ones who opens up themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it's even the people you didn't expect to open up who surprise you the most.
You know, I actually experience this quite often. When I open up, even here in this podcast, people suddenly start sharing their own. So it's really a fact that in the moment you dare to put words on something, it gives other kind of the permission to do the same. And I've had people tell me things they've never said out loud before, and that really touches me, of course. But at the same time, it also makes me a bit sad because it means many are walking around maybe feeling ashamed of their thoughts and struggles and decides to keep it all inside. And I for sure have done that too, way too often. And that is really hard. My experience is that it will eventually blow up in your face if you don't let the steam out.
You're right about that. And shame just adds another heavy layer on top of everything else. And that's such a lonely place to be because not only are you carrying the weight of what you're going through, but you're also carrying the fear of what people will think if they really knew, right? And I think that's why it feels so good when someone dares to be honest. It's like breaking the silence for everyone else too. Suddenly the struggle isn't just hidden in the shadows anymore. It's out in the open where it can breathe a little and where you're not alone with it. On the other hand, I also think a lot of us know that feeling of expecting people to notice or to ask, and then they don't. And that silence can feel just as heavy as the shame itself. It feels like your pain doesn't exist to others, even though it's taking up all the space inside of you. I mean, of course it does if you're not being open about it. But you know what I mean?
Sure, I get what you mean. And I sometimes wonder, as we've also touched into before, is it a bit of a Scandinavian thing too, being more closed off when it comes to psychological struggles and also openness compared to what at least I think it is in the US? Over there, people seem to be more used to talking about therapy, struggles, emotions, while here it can still feel a bit taboo, like you're oversharing if you admit you're not coping well, and people meet you with more awkwardness because they don't know how to respond.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Over here, I feel like they're more open in one way, but maybe it's also more surface leveled, if I can say, a bit shallow in a way. Maybe it's not so deep despite being open about therapy and such. It's maybe more about being polite and say things like, hey, how are you? Because I feel like everyone does that here. But I don't know if people actually expect to get a deep answer out of that. It's more like a politeness thing.
Yeah, I don't know either. Maybe that's not the case, or it's more like you say, shallow in a way, not that deep. But for me, that awkwardness, that silence can sometimes feel louder than anything. It's like some people tiptoe around you, hoping grief won't show up in the conversation, afraid to say the wrong thing. And in the end, they end up saying nothing at all. Or they aren't able to meet you with honesty because of insecurity or fear, maybe. I don't know. But honestly, I think most of us would rather have someone stumbling through an imperfect sentence than be met with complete silence. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, if you lost someone or you're going through something hard, the worst thing isn't someone saying the wrong thing, maybe, though I know that can be hard too. But when people pretend nothing happened, I mean, come on. That's just strange, especially when it's, like losing a spouse or a child.
Mm.
And then you're just left with this huge elephant in the room. This is when they know you and your story, of course. I guess these are the moments of connection where you end up carrying both the grief and the loneliness because of the fact that openness isn't present.
Mm. But again, we are all so different. For some, maybe it's easier also when people say nothing in these moments. Honesty and openness can be really hard also because of the vulnerability. But I do think that's why those unexpected, ordinary moments with openness and connection with complete strangers can feel so extraordinary and freeing also, because suddenly your grief isn't invisible anymore. Someone sees you, someone dares to step into that space with you. And maybe, as we said, for some, it's also easier with strangers. They can be, I don't know, safer than the people you know in that way also.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It is sometimes easier with complete strangers in unlikely, unexpected moments. And it can contribute to open that door so that you maybe dare to be more open to the people close to you also, maybe.
Mm.
And I think that's why your car dealer story hit me so hard, because it's such an unlikely place for that kind of conversation. And yet maybe that's exactly why it mattered so much. It wasn't planned, it wasn't forced. It was just real life showing up. And I guess all three of you learned something that day.
For sure. I will never forget that meeting. And I also do want to say openness is never without risk. It might sound dramatic, but it's true. When you open up, you also open yourself to potential rejection or even criticism. Or you can see, like I said earlier, that people become awkward and want to run away from you when you open up. And some people you may expect will ask you how it's going or salute you for your honesty. They say nothing. So that's also a thing. You make yourself vulnerable, and that can be really scary. So I totally get why people choose to be silent also.
Yeah, I do too. That's so true what you said. And it's fascinating, really, how differently people respond to openness. Some will cheer you on, some will be silent, some will come closer and share their own stories, and some will maybe look away or even criticize you.
Yeah. I keep asking myself, why is that? Why do some people feel the need to criticize others for speaking out? I don't know. But I do know that these differences in reactions can really affect how safe people feel to share in the first place.
That's the tricky part, isn't it? Because even though some people might react with silence or criticism, the moments where openness actually connects us with others, those are so powerful. They almost outweigh the risk. And I think that's why it's worth daring anyways.
I completely agree. Because the truth is, the more we talk about grief, trauma, and struggles, the less shame there is around it. And honestly, that shame is, as we keep repeating, often heavier than the grief itself because it isolates you. But when someone meets you with compassion instead of judgment, suddenly you don't feel so alone anymore. You feel seen, and that can be life-changing in the smallest of moments.
Yeah. And sometimes it's the most unexpected places where that happens. I mean, as we shared here, we both had those experiences where someone opens up. I think we all have, if we think about it, and it just takes the whole conversation to a different level. And those moments stay with you, don't they?
They really do. And I think that's why I choose to keep being open in my way, even though it makes me vulnerable, because I've seen what happens when someone dares to take that first step. It's like giving others permission to put down their armor just for a second, as we said. And in that moment, something really human comes through. We all carry stuff inside. We have things that we don't like talking about or sharing. And when it comes to grief and trauma, I mean, it's always there, but some of us only take it out when the moment feels right. And as we said, sometimes it's a stranger who shares their story, a neighbor, a new colleague, or even a child who asks something, and suddenly, boom, your heart cracks wide open.
Oh, yes. I mean, children are masters at that. They ask the most honest questions, don't they? Isn't that what they say? Children and drunk people are the ones who say it or ask whatever comes to their minds
Mm.
without any filter. Like, why are you wearing that? Or where's your husband? Why is he bald? Or why doesn't grandma come to our house anymore? In that bluntness, they somehow name the very things adults are often too afraid to voice.
Exactly. And even though it can sting a little, there's also something refreshing about it too. Kids don't complicate it with shame or awkwardness, they just say it. And sometimes that honesty is exactly what we need, also.
Yeah, it can definitely open some doors.
It really can. But talking about kids and their spontaneous openness, do you remember your oldest daughter in the back seat of the car that one time when our stepdad's father just had passed away? I will never forget that.
Oh, yes. I sometimes wonder where she got her instant reactions from.
I know. It's such a funny story, though. I remember we all laughed so bad when you told us. So the story is you picked her up from daycare, right? She must have been about 4 or 5, and this was right after he passed away.
Yeah, she was so cute sitting there in the back seat looking out the window, and all of a sudden she asks me, where's Bisten's dad? And, we didn't really see them that often, but for some reason she must have thought of him that day. So I just said, oh, remember he died? And then she blurts out, who killed him? I almost drove off the road.
So funny. She thought someone killed him.
Yes. And honestly, very funny now, and then, because for her experience with death was when we killed spiders, because I'm terrified of spiders. So I think it probably came from that. Like,
Okay.
oh, he died. Who killed him?
How awful and fun. I mean,
Yeah.
kids have this way of asking things so directly, so spontaneous, no filter at all. And they're genuinely trying to make sense of something. So I totally understand your reaction.
Yeah. Came out of the blue. So, of course, I explained a little about death and such after. And after that, she just said something like, okay, and went back to doing whatever she was doing in the backseat.
Yeah.
Cutie.
Kids. It's amazing. They can take so much in and just settle when you just talk to them honestly and clearly. And I think that is very important, to be as accurate and honest as you can, not to scare them, but to help make something that might feel big and scary a little more understandable. Though for her, it was more about the accuracy. We don't kill them all.
No, we sure don't. Imagine her growing up thinking everyone who dies gets killed. Oof. Well, she learned a thing or two that afternoon, and I did too.
Yeah. This whole conversation also makes me reflect on how differently we all respond to these moments, these encounters, these meetings with kids for sure, but also in general. Some of us are naturally open, some shy away, some are curious, some freeze. Our personalities, our upbringing, our experiences, even the culture we grew up in, they all shape how we experience and also cope with grief and openness.
And I think that's why these spontaneous, honest moments, like for instance, a child asking a question, those moments can be so profound. They catch us off guard, but they also remind us to face things clearly, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and we adults often hush the kids in these moments of sudden openness and honesty. And I think we all have had our moments when our kids are speaking their truth, asking questions, and you just want to cover their mouths and sink into the floor.
Yeah, for sure. It can be so embarrassing and painful and shameful.
Totally. But instead of hushing them and put shame in them too, I think maybe the better approach might be to answer with calmness and honesty, like you did with your daughter, despite she needed a reality check on another level. No, but just try to explain in a simple way, not too scary, just clear. I think that works. Kids can take it in. They're often braver than we give them credit for.
They are. And that it's often as parents we overthink it, I guess. Sometimes it's actually the children who ask the bluntest questions, and that way they give us a wake-up call. Even though it can feel uncomfortable and confronting, it's also the most honest thing in the room.
Yeah, it really is. And now I just remembered something. Because when my boyfriend had just been diagnosed with cancer, the very first time he saw his little nephew afterwards, he must have been around 5 or 6. The kid just shouted across the shore, "Are you going to die now?" He was standing there yelling it as my boyfriend came over in his boat to their cabin. I
Oh
mean,
no.
just imagine the faces of the people standing around. I can picture it so clearly.
Oh yeah.
And when my boyfriend told me about it later that day, I just thought, oh no, what do you even say to that? It's such a brutal question, but at the same time, it's completely natural for a kid. For him, cancer equals dying. Of course, he would ask that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess when a kid says this, you don't take it as, you don't take it in the same way. He probably laughed a little.
Yeah.
Kids don't tiptoe around things the way we do. They just go straight to the heart of it.
Yeah.
And yes, it could feel brutal, but at the same time, it's kind of refreshing in a way and innocent because they name it right away. They ask the hard questions and they learn from whatever we choose to tell them in those moments. And that's important to remember. We're the ones teaching them.
Yeah, exactly. And like we said before, adults often try to hush kids in situations like that. Don't ask that, or we don't talk about that now. But actually, I think the better thing is to just answer simply and honest, not sugarcoating, but not giving them every heavy detail either. And that's what they did there. Once my boyfriend and probably also the others there gave him an answer, the uncertainty was gone. The boy could just exhale and move on. He understood enough for it to make sense to him. And then he could go right back to being a kid again.
Yeah, that's such a good example of how honesty spoken with love can actually be easier for children to handle than vague words because kids pick up on everything. They sense when something is wrong, and if no one names it, their imagination will fill in the blanks. And sometimes what they imagine is far worse than the truth.
That's exactly it. And I think that's a lesson for us adults too. We try so hard to protect each other with gentle words, but sometimes the real gifts is to just tell the truth clearly, kindly, and in a way that fits the person in front of you.
Yeah, that's so true.
And this also makes me think about all the different words we use for death and dying. You know, past, passed away, gone, gone to a better place. You lost someone, they are no longer with us. Or here in Norway, we say sovnet in, like someone's gone into this never ending sleep. Those phrases are meant to soften it, I guess, but they can sometimes confuse children or even adults.
Yeah, and that sounds gentle, almost poetic. But the tricky part is, especially with children, it can actually create confusion or even fear, depending on what you're saying, of course. I heard of kids losing a parent and then being terrified of falling asleep themselves because the adults around them called it, he's just in deep sleep or asleep.
Mm. And that is totally understandable and really not ideal. I think it comes from wanting to make it softer because death feels so brutal and final. But death is also a natural part of life and it can be brutal and final for sure. It is. And in our effort to try to soften it, we sometimes end up making it harder or even scarier.
I think that's one of those things adults do to protect themselves as much as the children, really. Because saying the actual words, he died, he is dead, it feels so sharp, almost like a stab.
Mm.
But maybe we need to practice saying it more. Naming reality doesn't make it worse, it just makes it clearer.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, how language shapes our experience. When we say he passed away, it sounds like something distant, something that just drifted. But when we say he died, it's more direct, more grounded. And maybe that's important, especially for children, so they don't get lost in metaphors they can't fully understand.
Hmm. And yet, I can also understand why people lean on those softer words, though. Sometimes it's the only way they can bring themselves to say it at all. It's like the words are too heavy, too final, so you need that cushion of gentleness to not break down.
Yeah. And I don't think it's all wrong. We all do it. But I do think it shows how uncomfortable we are as a culture with talking about death directly. We're afraid of the bluntness, but maybe what children and honestly adults too needs isn't fancy words. It's honesty spoken with love.
That's a really important point because if we avoid the hard words, we're also avoiding the reality, and grief already has enough loneliness built into it. Adding confusion just makes it heavier, I guess.
Yeah. And that makes me think, how often do we in everyday life hide behind phrases that softens reality? Not just about death, but about pain in general. We say, I'm fine when we're not. We say, it's nothing when it's actually everything. Maybe that's the deeper pattern here, our instinct to make hard things sound smaller.
Yeah. And in a way, that's what we've been circling around this whole episode. These everyday encounters, these sudden conversations about grief, they break through that surface language. They force us to be real, to drop the polite phrases, and just name what it is.
And when that happens, when we stop dressing it up and just are saying it, it can feel raw, but it also feels kind of freeing. It's like you finally put words on the weight you've been carrying.
Hmm. It's like truth itself can be healing, even if it's painful, because at least then we're not pretending.
So true. You know, this whole conversation also makes me reflect on how differently we all move through the world. Some people are naturally open. You meet them at the grocery store, and 5 minutes later, you've shared a life story. And then others are more closed off, almost guarded. It's not wrong, it's just different. But I do think those who only see themselves sometimes struggle to notice the small openings around them. It's like they're too shut in to see the beauty or the connection that could actually be right there.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And maybe this is a strange shift, but in connection to that, I've also noticed how some people always seem to find something to complain about. Some seem to be stuck in this negativity in a way, and bitterness also, maybe. And don't get me wrong, I don't mean the usual everyday frustrations. We all have those. Traffic bills, a messy kitchen, a migraine, that's just life. But I mean the ones who almost seem to live in that mode, where every conversation turns into what's wrong with their boss or their health or just life in general. And I promise I'm not outing anyone here, but we all have met people like that.
Right. Is this me with my migraines? I feel like when I have a migraine, maybe I say it too often. But it's always easiest to complain to the people closest to you.
I don't mean you. I mean those who are in that constant state of negativity and bitterness. Since losing my husband and, live the life I live now, I noticed I have so little patience for that. I feel like that is such a waste of time, to be honest.
It's totally understandable. It makes so much sense because grief changes your perspective. Suddenly, the smallest stuff feels even smaller because you carried something so much heavier. And of course, that shifts how you see things.
Yep. So when you've lived through real loss and trauma, you start craving conversations that matter. At least I do. So
Mhm.
when someone keeps circling the same small complaints, it can feel really uncomfortable. Like, don't you see what really matters? come on, open your eyes. And at the same time, I do get that we all need to vent sometimes. I do too. But I guess what I mean is don't let it take over completely, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I understand what you mean. Because some people just, I think what you're trying to say is that, of course, it's okay to say that I have a migraine to you briefly, but the entire conversation shouldn't be about that, because then I would just sit there and feel my headache, you know? Just
Mm.
get it. It's not
You
worth
become
talking
your
about for
headache.
that long. I become my headache. Yes, that is a
You're so much more.
great way of saying it. And I think personalities and upbringing maybe plays a huge role here. Some people grew up in homes where complaining was almost the language of love. You're bond by sighing over the weather or traffic. Like in Norway, right? Where half of our conversation is like, oh, it's raining again.
So true. And then you in the US, it's almost the opposite. People can be falling apart inside, but when you ask, they'll smile and say, I'm fine. And I mean, we do that too, of course.
Yeah, and that's kind of the standard phrase. Yeah. So, depending where you're from or where you were raised, negativity or positivity can become your default. And then add in personality types. Introverts might grieve more quietly, maybe even seem withdrawn, while extroverts often process grief by talking it out, sometimes over and over. Pragmatic types might jump into problem solving, while the more emotional ones feel every wave deeply. And none of it is wrong. It just means when grief shows up, we bring very different tools to the table.
Yeah, of course we do. And that's maybe why these meetings with grief can be so tricky, because what feels like support to one person might feel overwhelming to another. Some want advice, some want silence, some just want company, and some want to complain. It's for sure not a one size fits all kind of thing, this.
And I read some research that supports this too. Psychologist talks about how grief reorders our priorities, shifts our hierarchy of concerns. What once felt important drops away, while authenticity and connection move to the top. And on the flip side, neuroscience shows that chronic complaining literally rewires the brain also. It strengthens pathways that keep you focused on problems, which increases cortisol, your stress hormone. So, ironically, the more you complain, the worse you feel.
So there you go.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating, but also kind of depressing. But yeah, that explains so much. And let me just say this clearly. Of course, I understand that people need to ventilate. I want my friends to feel safe, bringing me both their small and their big struggles. That's what friendships are for. And it's not what I'm talking about now. I just think there's a difference between needing to share and living in that loop.
And maybe part of it is also about reminding each other of perspective, not shutting anyone down, but gently saying, don't let the struggles blind you to the beauty what's still there.
Yes. And connected to that, I think it's so important not to let other people's stress become our stress. Like the well known Mel Robbins says, you can't change other people. You can only choose whether to let their patterns affect you. We all have our defaults, of course, but in the end, the choice is ours.
I love that. Because even with grief and struggles as companions, you can still choose to notice what's good and what's worth holding on to. And that's one of the paradoxical gifts of grief, actually. It strips away the nonsense and makes you more awake to what really matters.
It really does. It's like we talked about before. Grief makes you kind of allergic to small talk that goes nowhere and more hungry for the real meaningful conversations.
Understandable. Life is too short to live in constant complaint. Vent if you need to, but then lift your eyes. Choose joy where you can, because joy doesn't just show up, it's actually something you can create moment by moment.
So, talking about meetings and connections, I have to say again, I know I've talked about this before, but when you're a next of kin and you go along to all those hospital visits and admissions, you end up meeting so many different people in healthcare too. And I really must say this again, because some of these encounters, they really change you. They really stay with you, because when life is most vulnerable, that is when openness really matters. So today I want to take a moment to honor one very special nurse we meet every other week at the outpatient clinic when my boyfriend gets his chemo. From day one, she has been absolutely remarkable. The way she meets us, her presence, her warmth is just something rare, I think. She really helps us to hold on to hope and see solutions instead of just challenges. And that, honestly, is such a gift.
That is amazing and sounds so moving. What is it about her that makes her stand out so much?
It is moving and beautiful. And this whole conversation here today made me think of her also, and all these meetings we have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just one thing, it's just the way she's there. You can feel that she's in the right place doing the work she's meant to do. She has this calm, grounded presence that somehow makes you breathe easier, even in the middle of fear and uncertainty. You feel safe and seen. I really think she deserves all the recognition in the world. What a woman.
What a gift. She is in the right place. And I love that. In the middle of everything, you can really meet so many beautiful souls.
And for me, I find it very important to honor that, to say it out loud, the good stuff. Go tell people, compliment where you can. It's important, and it can be life-changing for some.
That's so true. Just think about it. When people compliment you or say nice things, that is maybe what you remember them for. Those beautiful things and meetings tend to stick with you, right? Not just the negative ones.
It really does. So the funny thing is, she actually listens to this podcast, my man. He has been bragging about it left and right, telling everyone about what we're doing here. So even the healthcare workers we meet along the way hear about it. Makes me a bit embarrassed and awkward, but very proud also, of course.
Yeah, you should be for sharing your story. He is truly the sweetest. Bragging.
He really is.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
So to you, Mia, you're a true everyday hero. We are so deeply grateful for you and the work you do. So thank you.
Yes. So beautiful, sister. Thank you, Mia, I have to say too. Is she the one you mentioned to me once? She told you something that really stayed with you? What was that again?
Yeah, that was her. I think it was the first time we met up after she had heard the first couple of episodes of this very podcast. And of course, before this, she didn't know my story and all that. And we talked a bit back and forward, teared up. And in the end, after our talk, she said to us, "You're both so good at living fully." I mean, in Norwegian, she said, directly translated, "in the width of life." And that phrase really stayed with me. And now I sprinkle it around like glitter. I just love it because it is actually spot on. We really are good at that. And it was such a gift to hear it from her. Kind of the perfect capture on what we are doing, the life we're living, what we are good at. And she sees that and named it perfectly.
She really did. And you really are good at living. In the width, like she said, I understand. But what does that mean to you, though, living fully?
For me, it's about choosing to see the positive side no matter what, to look for what we can do instead of drowning in what we can't, to prioritize, to plan ahead, and just do exactly what we want to do now, not postpone, but just do. It's a way of living that I think works in every situation, really, not just when you're facing illness or hardship, because you can absolutely choose to see life in a brighter way, whatever your circumstances. But the key is you have to choose, and I'm so grateful that we can.
That's so true. And I agree. You are really good at that. But why do you think some people manage to do that and then others don't?
Honestly, I think that's one of life's great mysteries. Why is it that some people can find light even in the darkest times, while others get completely stuck? And I don't have the full answer. But again, I do know that every single day I am grateful that my partner and I are able to stay positive, even in the middle of treatment and uncertainty. It gives us strength to keep moving forward. And I also have to say this, his oncologist is just the same. She has that same mindset, the same positivity, and it makes such a difference. So in case you listen to this too, we are really blessed that you are, I have to say, our oncologist. You are a true hero also.
I love that you both are being met this way in healthcare. It's not always the case. And that really gives me so much hope and comfort too, I must say.
Yeah, and again, it really shows how vital the role of nurses are. And it makes me so proud to be a nurse myself. So I just wanted to shine a light on that today because they're the ones who meet patients and families the most. Their presence, their attitude, it can shape the whole experience.
And we can conclude by saying living fully is really about perspective, choosing to look for hope, choosing to see what's still possible, even in difficult times.
And that choice makes all the difference.
You know, we circled back to this a few times today, that grief changes you. But in its own strange way, it also sharpens your sense of what really matters.
And maybe the best way to honor both life and loss is just to keep choosing joy, even in small, ordinary moments. Not because everything is perfect, but because life is fragile and we don't get endless chances.
And it's not only about joy, it's about those little human moments that can turn a day around, like that man at the car dealership. You know, he had a loss, you had a loss, and your son had a loss. And for a second, the three of you connected over something so much deeper than cars. And that's what being human is about.
Exactly. And it's not always simple. People don't always know how to respond when the hard stuff comes up. Like when someone asks about kids and there's a loss behind the answer. Sometimes there's silence and awkwardness, and that's okay. We can't expect everyone to get it right. But those moments remind us how important it is to at least try.
And kids actually do this better than adults sometimes. They just ask, "Are you going to die?" Or, "Why doesn't he have hair?" And we panic. But really, they're just curious, honest, unfiltered. There's something to learn there. That openness doesn't have to be polished or perfect to matter, even though an adult should maybe say it in a different way, not as blunt, maybe.
Of course. And that also ties into how different we all are. Some people are open, some hold back, some talk it out again and again, others stay quiet, and neither is wrong. It just shows grief has many languages, and it's our job to listen for each other's.
Maybe that's also why constant complaining can feel so strange once you've been through something heavy. It's not that those people are bad. It's just that grief changes your filter. You notice what really matters and what doesn't, and sometimes you need to remind others too, in a gentle way, of course, that there is more to life than focusing on the small annoyances. things you can't do anything about.
Yeah. So maybe that's the invitation today for us and for everyone listening. Carry your story. Honor the people who've stood by you, the brave healthcare workers, the friends who dare to be open, even the strangers who surprises us with their honesty. And don't forget to look up, to stay open, to keep choosing joy again and again.
Let us end with this widely attributed phrase from the actor and comedian Robin Williams. Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind always.
Nina had a dream, all black and white. We were talking in English, yeah, that ain't right. Two Norwegian sisters miles apart, but that dream lit a fire, put a mic to the heart. Katrine's in the States, Nina's back home. Two voices, one mission through the microphone. Grief in life, the highs and the lows. We hit record, uh-oh, where the file go? Oh, we fumble, we stumble, but baby we shine. Lost the intro, never mind. Wi-Fi shaky, cables crossed, but our hearts stay strong, no moment lost. From a dream to the mic, now the world can hear. Two sisters telling truths with a laugh and a tear. We live, we learn, we sip, we sigh. Talking love, talking lost, let the echoes fly. Grief walks in, pulls up a chair, says I'll stay a while, yeah, life ain't fair. But we mix it with laughter, a toast in hand, finding light where the dark still stands. Ba-da-da-boo-doo, is this thing on? Mic's on mute, oh well, move along. Ba-ba-dee, ba-ba-da, take two. Oops, too late, let's laugh it through. From a dream to the mic, now the world can hear. Two sisters telling truths with a laugh and a tear. We live, we learn, we sip, we sigh. Talking love, talking lost, let the echoes fly. So plug in, lean in, let's take our time. No script, no filters, just rhythm and rhyme. We're here, we're now, we're in our prime. Two sisters, one dream.